There's all sorts of things that go into developing an e-commerce website, but before we actually start building one, we need to look at the necessary components and we need to define some terms that are common in this industry. If we break it down in how an e-commerce website actually works, we have the standard e-commerce process, we have e-commerce with third-party processors, and we need to understand SSL. So let's define some of those things. The standard e-commerce process is you have a shopping cart, there's a payment gateway, it connects to a merchant account, and that will deposit the money into the bank account. So let me talk a little bit more specifically about each of those items. We start off with the shopping cart. The shopping cart's job is to manage the shopping process. It needs to communicate with the payment gateway, and it needs to keep users happy. The way in which we integrate and design our website is going to be especially important because we want to make this process very streamlined to our end user. When we think about WordPress, our shopping cart options are WooCommerce, WP eCommerce, GigoShop, Gravity Forms, Easy Digital Downloads, and Cart66, just to name a few. All of these have pros and cons, and I definitely encourage you to look at other options. We're going to be working with WooCommerce, which is a great solution for e-commerce, but there are other ones out there, and depending on what you're trying to do, there may be a better option. Although WooCommerce is certainly capable of performing transactions in lots of different venues, and it has a lot of flexibility for customization. So when you're trying to decide which shopping cart you'll want to use, the answer is that it depends. It isn't about features. It's really about you. What are your needs? What are your desires? What kind of stuff are you going to be selling? So you should definitely ask yourself questions like, how technical am I? How much money do I have? Can I afford to hire a developer, or do I want to do this myself? Am I selling downloadable objects, or am I shipping products? And if I'm shipping products, do I know my tax and inventory needs? Am I protecting content? Am I creating a marketplace where others are going to provide the products? Will I be setting up a set of shops, like using a multi-site type of feature? It's all about you and what you plan to do. The reason that we're going to be focusing on WooCommerce is, from my experience and my research, WooCommerce is definitely one of the most popular plugins that provides e-commerce sort of functionality. And even though at its core WooCommerce is free, depending on what your needs are, be prepared to invest in some extensions that you may need. The next step in the process is a payment gateway. To run an e-commerce website, you need a payment gateway. The payment gateway is used to authorize and process your customer's transaction. The money isn't automatically transferred directly into your bank account. What happens is that after each transaction is processed successfully, the money goes into a holding account called a merchant account. From here, it can be withdrawn into your own account. This is similar to a point of sale in a retail store. It's going to authorize payments for merchants, and it's going to keep a log of all of those authorized transactions. Payment gateways do tend to charge fees. Usually you'll have a transaction fee, a batch fee, and possibly a monthly minimum fee. The merchant account is the bank account that receives payments from the card issuer. It's usually a separate company from the payment gateway, and it kind of works like a collection agency. So what merchant accounts do is they are going to communicate with the issuing bank. That's the bank that holds the credit card of your customer. So the acquiring bank, which is also the merchant account, is going to say, hey, one of your customers purchased something for $100. The issuing bank is going to say, okay, here's the money, and then the acquiring bank is going to verify that that actually did occur. Merchant account, also referred to as the acquiring bank, is going to assume the risk for the transaction. And the risk involved has to do with fraud and chargebacks. So the reason that they take the risk is they can charge more fees. A discount rate comprises of a number of dues, fees, assessments, network charges, and markups that the merchants are required to pay for accepting credit and debit cards. Each bank has real costs in addition to the wholesale interchange fees and creates profit by adding markup to all of the aforementioned fees. These types of fees do vary widely depending on the bank that you're using. With a merchant account, the application process can be very detailed and very time-consuming. Securing a merchant account approval before constructing the e-commerce platform is certainly recommended. If you don't do this first, you may end up building an e-commerce website and then finding out that the fees are too much or it doesn't work with what you're doing. So you can see when we think about the standard e-commerce process, there's all sorts of different components that are going to be part of it. And usually each part of the process is going to have some sort of fees that are going to in turn be passed on to you. And you'll need to know what these are so that you can upsell your inventory and still make a profit. The other option that we have available is to have an e-commerce website with a third-party processor. A third-party processor is going to allow you to accept online payments without needing a merchant account of your own. Instead, they let you kind of piggyback or use their merchant account under their own terms of service. This usually requires minimal setup. Examples of third-party processors are PayPal, Stripe, and 2Checkout, among others. If we compare the standard e-commerce process with an e-commerce using a third-party process, here's a breakdown of some of the things that are going to happen. With a standard e-commerce process, you're going to have lower transaction fees overall. It might look more professional because you can customize the way that it looks. It's not going to be so templated, and also all of the charges can occur on your domain no matter what. The recurring billing is usually fairly simple. The deposits are automatically going to be deposited into your account, and it happens very quickly. You will need SSL, which stands for Secure Socket Layer. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The standard e-commerce process is under rigorous PCI compliance. Just a quick overview as to what PCI is. PCI stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and it's a set of security standards that's designed to ensure that all companies that accept, process, store, or transmit credit card information maintain a secure environment. PCI applies to any organization, regardless of the size or number of transactions, that accepts, transmits, and stores any cardholder data. It's essentially there to protect the cardholder. If you want to find out more information on PCI, I would encourage you to visit the PCI Security Standard website. They have a wealth of information that will allow you to learn more about it. I'll provide this link to you in the resource materials. In general, when you're dealing with a standard e-commerce process, the setup process is usually a lot more involved and a lot more complicated. A third-party processor, on the other hand, tends to have higher transactions fees, and sometimes it can appear kind of amateurish. You may have been to a website where you go to pay and all of a sudden you're not on the website anymore. You're at PayPal or you're some other site and none of the branding is there and it just doesn't look the same. So the experience isn't quite as holistic. Third-party processors can have complicated recurring billing. The automatic deposits happen weekly, or sometimes the user may need to initiate the deposits to actually happen. An advantage is that in many cases you don't need an SSL. The PCI compliance is much simpler, or you might even not need to worry about it at all. And the process to set up is generally much easier. So some things that you need to think about when you're choosing which payment system you want to use is think about how much volume you're going to be processing. Think about if you need to do any sort of recurring billing. Recurring billing would be like a membership site where you're going to be automatically billing your clients on a regular basis. Think about where you're based. Think about the company that you want to use. Do your research. Find out if they have a good reputation. Find out what sort of support is available to you. And find out if the gateway will integrate well with the shopping cart that you're planning on using. You'll also want to look into any sort of hidden fees. A lot of times the main costs may seem very attractive, but then once you get into the process, you'll find that there's a lot of extra fees that are being charged. So make sure you find out about all of the fees. The next item we need to think about is security. If a web page is collecting sensitive information, the user has to be secured with SSL. HTTPS, or Secure HTTP, is an encryption method that secures the connection between the user's browser and your server. That's going to make it much harder for hackers to eavesdrop on the connection. An SSL certificate provides extra security for your customers by encrypting the connection between your customer and your website. This is essential when you're dealing with sensitive information like credit card details. Now, whether you will have to personally set up an SSL certificate or not is going to depend on the payment processor that you're using. If you're using PayPal or something like that, you don't really have to worry about it. The sensitive payment information is not entered on your website. Rather, it's entered on the third-party processor's website, like PayPal. Certain services will have users take responsibility and set up their own SSL certificate. Nowadays, setting up SSL is actually not that difficult. The simplest approach is simply to contact your hosting provider and buy one from them. If you use one of the big hosting companies, they will probably even take care of the installation. SSL, as I mentioned, stands for Secure Socket Layer, and it's actually a protocol that allows the program on your computer to establish a secure connection to a remote server. By using this, it makes it much harder for hackers to eavesdrop on your connection. How SSL works is the web browser is going to make a request, hey, I need a secure connection. The web server is going to say, no problem, here's my security certificate, and the web browser is going to go on and do what it needs to do. There's all sorts of different types of SSL certificates. There's shared SSL, which is offered free by many hosting companies these days. The shared SSL is shared by all the sites on a server. When you use shared SSL, the URL is not your domain, which can cause trust issues with other users. So once you actually start processing the transaction, the domain is no longer going to be your domain. The next type is domain validated. Domain validated SSL certificates are no frill. They're encryption-only certificates, which means that all you have to do is prove that you own the domain by responding to an email or a phone call using the information from the WHOIS record of the domain. So the good news is that you can get the fully functioning certificate within minutes. The price also tends to be extremely cheap. The bad news is that it has low assurance. Because the company itself is not validated, these certificates don't really help your visitors know who's running your site. If you have an e-commerce site, potential buyers may be scared off. It's also less secure. The certificates themselves still enable full 128-bit encryption, but there are other security problems that are associated with them. They also tend to make man-in-the-middle attacks a little bit more dangerous. In summary, domain-validated certificates do almost nothing to verify that you are talking to who you think you're talking to. Extended validation is going to certify your business and your domain. It can take a few days or a few weeks to actually issue an extended validation. When you have extended validation, you'll see the green bar in the browsers, and the costs tend to be a little bit higher, usually about $150 a year. You should now have an overview of the process of how an e-commerce website functions and the types of things that you would need in order to build an e-commerce website.